Now, y'all look money hungry, and that's good. Anybody tells you money's the root of all evil doesn't have any. They say money can't buy happiness. Look at the smile on my face. Ear to ear, baby.
I'm Chris Hill, and welcome to Money Unplugged. Every week I talk with someone about their life through the lens of money, how they viewed it growing up, what they learned over time, and how their relationship with money has evolved along the way. Today on the show, Morgan Housel, author of the international bestseller The Psychology of Money and the New York Times bestseller Same as Ever. Now, you've probably heard Morgan on other podcasts, including ones I've hosted in the past, including his own podcast. But there are some things we get into that you probably have not heard him talk about before. So let's get into it with the one and only Morgan Housel. When you think about your earliest memory of money, what is it?
I have three that come to mind. The first one is I would set the stage a little bit here, which is I grew up, my first 10 years, my family was pretty poor. Both my parents were students. They had a couple grants that we could use for grocery money and whatnot. And then their earnings changed pretty substantially when I turned 10. So I saw it was like a black and white transition. It literally happened 1 month that their earnings moved, and I saw the contrast there. And that was important because when you experience a contrast, I think you're much more likely to pay attention to what's going on versus if you have one income your entire childhood that your parents are earning. So seeing that contrast, I paid attention to it a lot. The two experiences that were, I think, transformational to me happened not in my childhood, but in my teenage years. One, I've written quite a bit about my first job as a valet. The first time was at a hotel in Lake Tahoe, and it was a very nice hotel, and it was my first experience with very wealthy people. I grew up in a town that was not poor, but it was definitely not rich. It was kind of lower middle class, let's say. And the richest people in town drove like new Ford pickups. That was what I thought wealth was. And now I started seeing people driving Ferraris and Lamborghinis. I didn't know that existed. And at the time, I was 18, and I just thought, whatever that is, I want it. And I want it now. That is great. I think a lot of this, Chris, I think I had an appropriate level of low self-esteem at the time. I didn't really have much of a high school education. I didn't really have any prospects of transitioning into adulthood when I was 18. And I was insecure about it, had a chip on my shoulders. And I think when you have that, you wake up in the morning and you don't feel good about where you are in life. Imagining a life where you have more money is a easy knee-jerk reaction to, I don't feel good about myself, but if I had more money and a nice car, then everything would be great. It's a very quick path of least resistance to think that. And then the third that was a big thing in my career was soon after that, when I was 18, my grandparents gave me $1,000 for my 18th birthday. And I went to Bank of America and I said, I want to open up a CD. And I said, I don't think I had any idea what that was. I think my dad probably told me I should do it. And I didn't understand what I was doing here, but I put $1,000 in a CD. And I so remember this like it was yesterday. The next morning I woke up and the bank balance, I logged in my account, the bank balance was $1,000.03. And I remember sitting there staring at the screen going like, oh my God, what? I got paid to do nothing.
The money fairy came in
the money fairy. And I still remember sitting there shaking my head at the screen being like, this is it. They will pay you to do nothing. Why would you want to work if you could be an investor? That was a huge transition into my becoming interested in investing.
So I want to get to your career in investing because my memory is it started pretty soon after college or maybe during college, but you end up at USC and you're studying what? You're studying economics, finance?
I was studying economics with the sole intention of becoming an investment banker. That was plan A, B, and C.
I want to be a guy who sells CDs.
I wanted to move to New York and work for Goldman Sachs or something. And this was a thing, too, where I didn't really know what an investment banker was. I didn't understand what the work really entailed. But I knew early on that they made a lot of money and they seemed to get a lot of attention, power, and admiration. And in the 18, 19-year-old mind of a boy, I was like, oh, that's it. That's what I want. And so, I was very interested in investing. I was reading a lot of investing books. I was too cheap to buy them, so I used to go to Barnes & Noble and just sit there and read them and put them back on the shelf. But so I was very interested in it. And my wife recalls that, we started dating when I think she was 19, I was 21. We were pretty young. And she recalls that I had the Berkshire Hathaway shareholder letters on my nightstand when we first met. So early on, when I was still at college, I was really gung-ho of like, this is what I'm going to do. And I think because of the chip on my shoulder from my lack of education, I was like, I got to do things that other people aren't. Other people can just go to class and they'll still get hired by Goldman Sachs at the end. I was like, I am so far behind everybody else that I need to put in the extra effort of reading books on my off time, spare time outside of class. And so I always wanted to be an investment banker. And then I got an investment banking internship in my junior year at USC. And the very quick story, because it was a very quick internship, was within the first hour, I was like, nope, not for me. This is not going to work. The culture of investment banking was so hardcore, so trying to break you early on. It's a different culture today, but in the mid-2000s, it was so hardcore of you're going to work 18 hours a day, and if you say anything about it, you're out of here. There's another guy waiting to take your spot. And I was like, this is not for me. There's no way I could live that life. I'm willing to work hard, but it felt just like a hazing culture. And I was like, no, I don't want anything to do with that. So that was actually a panic moment in my career. Because it was like, I've put all my eggs into investment banking. I have no plan B, but that's clearly not going to work. And then so that was several months of panic. What the heck am I going to do with my life now? And then I think a couple months later after that, I got an internship at a private equity firm in Los Angeles, summer internship, and I loved that. Private equity was great. It was a good culture. It was a mix between business and investing. Like you actually have to run the business after you invest in it. And I was like, great, this is what I'm going to do. Private equity, I'm going to do this. I love the firm I'm working at. They're willing to hire me full-time after I graduate. Gung-ho, here we go. And then that was summer of 2007. Everything started cracking up. The financial crisis, the opening salvo of the financial crisis was 2007. So the firm I was working at said, we're not going to have a spot for you full time when you graduate. Your internship is done. It's over. And it was literally, I've written about this before, it was that same day that they told me I couldn't work here anymore, that I was browsing Yahoo Finance and I clicked on an article by The Motley Fool and I realized it was written by a friend of mine. And I emailed him and I said, I didn't know you were writing for The Motley Fool. This is incredible. Tell me more about that. And he said, we know they're actually hiring writers right now. I could put in a good word for you. And that was it. I ended up staying at The Motley Fool for 10 years.
There's so much I want to get to. Let me go back to the Buffett letters on your nightstand, because I'll take you at your word when you say I wasn't a good student and you had a chip on your shoulder and you want to work hard. But was that the reason for the letters on the nightstand, or was there something in either the way Buffett writes or some, like my assumption is there was another light bulb that went off that you were like, oh, I'm not a great student, but this is interesting and I'm curious about this? I
think it was probably 50-50. Part of it was early on, it was, I want to become a good investor. Who's the best? I literally probably just searched that in Yahoo search engine back in the day, and it came up Warren Buffett, and I said, great, that's the guy to start reading about. I think that was probably the early push into reading about Buffett. But I think too, because I say this with no false modesty, I didn't have the intelligence to understand more complex finance. If I was reading a finance textbook and it was talking about derivative pricing and whatnot, that was Greek to me. I didn't understand any of it. But when you read the Berkshire shareholder letters, if you have an elementary understanding of business and economics, you understand all of it. So I think it was I understand he's the best, and B, I can actually understand this versus all the other textbooks. I do remember at USC, I would once in a while go into the library and pick up an academic finance book. I was an economics major, which meant that I didn't take a lot of finance courses. So I was like, I need to go do that myself. I need to learn about this myself. Let's go pick up a finance textbook and just see if I can learn anything. And I remember just opening a couple pages and being like, I don't understand a single word on this page. I don't understand any of it. And that was another just like, what am I doing? Like, I have these big aspirations and I'm so far, I'm 10 miles away from where I need to be. All the other students understand this. I don't get any of it. And Berkshire was so understandable. I think that was what attracted me to it.
Maybe this is a sore topic since the start of the financial crisis happens in 2007 and you get your dream job at the private equity firm yanked away from you. But I am curious what, if anything, you remember about the work that you did there. I mean, private equity to me has always been one of the, for lack of a better term, black boxes in the broad finance and investing industry. Yeah. I think a lot of investors understand what it is, but don't have a lot of insight into it. So you talked about okay, this is really hitting me in a good way. You're running the business. Like, do you remember any of the businesses that you were involved in, or any of the work that you were doing? I'm assuming it was like college intern, sort of grunt work, but also interesting in a way that the investment banking was not.
Yeah, it was a cool place. It was called Triton Pacific Capital Partners in Los Angeles, and I was a summer intern, so appropriately I did a lot of data entry and things like that. But it was also a good exposure of, hey, Morgan, you can sit in on the meetings where the managing directors are actually doing deals and having serious conversations. So I got to absorb a lot of it. And I mean, at the high level, I think the industry is more formalized now because there's so much more money today than there was 15 years ago. At the high level, there were a lot of let's call them mid-sized family businesses. I'm making this up. A guy in Phoenix owns a window installation company. He's run it for 30 years. He wants to retire. Business does $10 million a year in revenue, $2 million a year in profit, something like that, and he wants to sell. The firm I was at would be like, great, that's the market we're looking for. We want to buy you. And if they bought the company like that, let's say they buy the company for, $15 or $20 million, whatever it might be, the idea would be we, the private equity firm, will try to manage it, run it, make some changes with the idea that we'll probably sell it in 5 to 10 years. That was at the highest level. That's what it was. And so I loved the fact that part of what I did as an intern was kind of not deciding which companies to pitch to the managing directors, but actually putting together the presentation that somebody one level above me would be like, oh, that's a company they'll be interested in. And then I would put together the presentation, literally like making copies of the papers and stuff. But I loved just learning about a huge, wide variety of businesses. And these presentations would be like, oh, here's the last 5 years of revenue and profit. And that was such a crash course into understanding business. And I didn't know until that moment. I think before that, I was interested in finance, which is just transactions. It was like financing companies. Like investment banking is like, hey, how do you sell the company? I really wasn't interested in business, in running a business or what a good quality business was. But I think between the Berkshire letters and then actually seeing at the private equity firm, like, oh, this is a good business, that's a bad one. Because here's what makes this one good and that one bad. It was an exposure to business, which I realized was so distinct from finance.
You mentioned your wife. I think I heard relatively recently I think you talked about this maybe on another podcast, just sort of the idea of the two of you are talking, you're reminiscing about a time early in your relationship, maybe you're living in some like cheap apartment, that sort of thing, and you're wistful and nostalgic for like, God, that was great, that was amazing. And she sort of, brings you back to earth and like, what are you talking about? Like that was like that. So there are a couple of things I want to get into, but I guess my first one is, what do you think is behind that? Because I have had that same feeling myself. I know a lot of people have had that feeling of just sort of, and it's not just nostalgia, broad nostalgia. It's very specific to money. It's very specific to like, oh, that was so great. It was like, it's romanticizing a simpler time, a less expensive time, but also a time when you had a lot less money.
Yeah, I think what it is, and I would counter that, I think this applies to much more than money. I think there are a lot of things in culture that this applies to, which is that if I'm looking back at the past, particularly at my own life, when everyone's doing this for their own life, you know how the story ends. And so it's easy to look back. So in my specific case, I was reminiscing with my wife. Hey, remember when we lived in that apartment? We didn't have kids. We could sleep in. It was a great apartment, perfect location. Man, that was peak living. And she pointed out, she was like, Morgan, you were like the most depressed and anxious you've ever been in your life there. And I was like, yeah, actually, you're right. I do remember that. I remember like being miserable. Why do I think it was so good? I think the reason why is because today I look back to 2009 and I say, Morgan, things worked out. Like I know how the story ends given that time, within that time period. And it was not perfect. It was not great. There were challenges and struggles. But the things I was worrying about back then, 99% of them came to pass, and it's okay. So I know how the story ends, but I didn't know that back then. And that's important because when I look back at myself in 2009, today I view a kid who has nothing to worry about. But at the time, all I did was worry because I didn't know where it was going to go. And I think this is true, too. I wrote about this a couple weeks ago. The 1950s, we remember today as a nostalgic, like, peak Americana, and white picket fences, and, everything was great. A lot of that was because we know how the story ended, which was one of the biggest news stories that virtually everyone was worried about in the 1950s was nuclear holocaust. We know today it didn't happen. They didn't know it back then. And you had your 5-year-old practicing duck and cover drills in kindergarten. So when we look back, we're like, you guys had nothing to worry about. You guys, like, the future was bright, but they didn't know it back then. I think that's a big part of why this occurs.
In terms of sort of, and I'm not asking like, hey, how much were you making? But
I have all my tax returns here. If you want to just go through them line by line.
What's more riveting to listen to than that? And just, as I just insult all the tax podcasts out there. No, but I am curious though about like, was there a moment where you started making an amount of money and at the time, it felt like all the money in the world. Where you look back now and you're like, well, that was a reasonable amount. But like, what did you have sort of a jump in income? Because in my own personal life and friends that I've talked to, when we look back and that happens, that's what it is. It's like, oh, I'm not making a lot of money. I'm just making more than I used to on a percentage basis. But it feels like I have, like, drinks are on me.
Well, I think when you say that, I do remember that moment and what it was, and it was my first job as a host at Denny's. It was my very first job. And I remember getting my first paycheck. I was 17, maybe 16. And I remember getting my first paycheck. I think it was $85. And I remember sitting there staring at it like, wow, like incredible. And to me, like one of the takeaways there is what feels good with money is the contrast. Because I went from $0 to 85. And that, I think, felt better than if you are rich and you go from 10 million to 20 million. That might have no impact on your life. But 0 to 85 was like, man, I got some options now. Right. I can go out and live now. This is incredible. So it's just the gap between what you have and that's what makes you happy is the gap between. And, in the last week, as we're recording this right here, Elon Musk's net worth went from $200 billion to $300 billion in the last month. He gained $100 billion. What did that do to his happiness? Nothing. Guarantee you nothing. What did that do to his lifestyle? Nothing. There's no contrast there. Versus me going from 0 to 85 was like, the world just changed for me.
Coming up, there's a lot more with Morgan. But first, let me ask you a question. How are you doing with that New Year's resolution? Not the financial one, the one about your health. We all start the new year with a goal of getting in better shape. And for the past 15 years, the people who have been helping me are the people at Pacers Running. Pacers has all the shoe brands you want for running, cross-training, and more. They've got Brooks, New Balance, Nike, Hoka, Asics. They've got apparel for men and women, accessories. Pacers is going to help you get what you need for a healthier start in 2025. And you can get 10% off your first purchase when you use the promo code MONEY at runpacers.com. When you think about how much some workout gear costs, 10% off is real money. So just click the link in the show notes or go to runpacers.com, get the stuff you want, and get 10% off by using the promo code MONEY. All right, let's get back to Morgan. You've written about this, you've talked about this, that the way you invest is indexing, just broad indexing. Was that always the case, or was there a point early in your life where you said, I'm gonna try and pick some stocks, that kind of thing? And if that was the case, what made you flip the switch to just being like, no, I'm just doing broad indexing?
Yeah, no, I definitely started as a stock picker. I think it is very common for particularly young men to want to do that who don't have any experience because they massively overestimate their intelligence and their ability to actually go out. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was like, yeah, I'm going to go pick stocks. I remember the first stock I bought. I might be getting this wrong, the name wrong. I think it was called Umachi Steel. I think it was a Japanese steel company. Absolutely no idea where I found this or heard of it. Bought some shares, probably a couple $100, lost some money, sold it, bought some other stocks. There was a period where I was not day trading, but I think I was holding stocks for like a week, let's say. And in my mind, I was like, that didn't work.
Day trading.
It's close to it. And then I think I very slowly just started like moving up my holding period to probably a month, 6 months, a year. I did that for probably 4 or 5 years, where I would own probably 15 stocks that I would hold for a year or so. And I was reading their annual reports and going through their financials in Yahoo Finance, but I had no clue what I was doing. And I never measured my results. I don't think they were horrendous, but they were not good. It was enough that slowly over time, I was like, I should just own the index. I should just I'm spending so much time and energy and stress trying to pick these stocks, and it's not working out. I should just go buy that. I'll have better performance, and I can therefore use more time doing what I love, which at that point was writing. It was actually difficult for me because this is when I was at the Motley Fool, which is through and through a stock picking company. And I was kind of this side, over on the side, like, hey, actually, I don't do any of that whatsoever. Right. Please accept me. Hope you guys still love me. But I don't do that. I do something completely different. And to their credit, I was accepted and brought into the fold, and no one ever gave me crap for it, which I so appreciate, because they easily could have said, Morgan, great, like your writing, this isn't going to work. We're a stock picking company. Good day. They easily could have done that.
So one of the things that's come up a few times in this conversation is just how anxiety factors into money.
Yeah.
It was the case for your parents. It was the case for your family. The case for you when you're like, pretty much, anyone listening knows what that feels like. Is that one of those things that should just be talked about more, or even like as schools start to introduce finance and more schools start to teach finance, should there be like a day of that course that's just like, hey, can we just talk about mental health as it relates to finance? Because it really does seem like it's such a source of anxiety for so many people. And if you are able to save and invest and remove that, it can be incredibly freeing.
I think in theory, it would be great if we could do that. The reason that we by and large don't is because it's so socially stigmatizing and everyone has a completely different financial history and income and whatnot. The 3 topics that are so important in life, impact everybody's life, but you can't talk about, are money, religion, and sex. Impact everybody's life, don't talk about it. Don't talk about it at all. And I think money falls in that too, because let's say you're in high school, let's say, and your teacher says, all right, class, we're going to talk about money and anxiety today. Very well-meaning, that's great. One student raises their hands and say, yeah, my family's going through a lot of money anxiety today. This week, my dad recently had to sell his BMW and downgrade to a Toyota. You would have another student in class being like, what the hell, man? We can't even afford food. Right. We just got evicted last month. And that's why, and like at that point in the conversation, the teacher had to say, okay, enough. I'm sorry. We can't talk about this. Everyone's so different. It's so personal. And since money is like a tangible scorecard, for a lot of people, it's the scorecard of how well they're doing in life, which it should not be. But realistically, it is for a lot of people. Like, I'm not saying that's how it's, I wish that was not the case. It should not be the case. And you should find value in life outside of money. But for better or worse, we don't. And so a lot of people, if they're making a lot of money, they have a sense of moral superiority over other people. And if you're not making as much money, you feel like you're the underdog kind of getting stomped on from above. And that's why it's just like, it becomes so difficult to talk about. I have a couple of close friends who are CFPs, certified financial planners, that I talk in great detail, open the kimono about my money and my decisions and our goals and whatnot. And that is very freeing and liberating and helpful, but it's in private and it should stay there. And so that's always how I've thought about it. Should we talk about it more? Yes, but you need to be very careful who the audience is.
Well, like a doctor or a lawyer. Like,
same, right. Yeah.
Doctor-patient relationship, that sort of thing.
Yeah, some people on Twitter start talking about their health, and I say, stop right there. We don't need to hear any more about your feet. Just be done.
And maybe it's enough to just recognize, hey, this is going to be a part of the anxiety around money is always going to be a part of your life. It's just, 1, recognize that, and 2, to the extent possible, look, there are going to be times when money's really tight and it's like a boiling pot on a stove. And then, but even later in life, and I've talked to financial planners, I'm sure you have too, who have talked about the trouble that they have with clients who have done all the right things. They've saved and invested, and they're great. But they've been in the habit of saving and investing for 35, 40 years. And so now the anxiety comes in the form of, I'm not working anymore. Do we really have enough? All that sort of thing. And
they can't spend.
They can't spend. And then it's just like, at least try and move the pot from boiling on the front burner to it's a low simmer on the back burner.
And I think what happens in those situations when someone has saved for retirement, has plenty of money and they can't spend it, is that money has become part of their identity. And at that point, money is not a tool that you're using to live a better life. The money is using you. It has you by the marionette strings and it is controlling your life. And so it might be a financial asset, but it is a psychological liability at that point. It's hard to think about it in those terms. But if you have plenty of money and you cannot spend it, it's a financial asset and a psychological liability. And for a lot of people, they are bankrupt in that situation. They get more anxiety over losing the money that they have than they would benefit from actually spending that money and living a better life. And so that's one of like the peak ironies of the modern age, is that it is easier than ever to become wealthy today than it's ever been in human history. Not to say it's easy, but it's easier than ever. And I think at the same time, it's easier than ever to feel like you are falling behind, easier than ever to feel like it's inadequate, no matter how much you have, even if you're taking care of your family. And for a lot of people, harder than ever to spend it because we have such a culture of your net worth is your self-worth.
Before we move on, speaking of spending, later this year, new book about spending?
Yes, I wrote a book called The Art of Spending Money. And very similar to The Psychology of Money, but my first book, The Psychology of Money, had a lot to do with investing, which was near and dear to my heart. We talked about that background that I had. Probably 80% of the book is about investing. But money impacts everybody, but investing is actually a bit player there. It's a minority of what most people deal with. The vast majority of the world, but definitely the world, but in the United States, it's spending money. That's going to be the dominant function of money in your life. And just like The Psychology of Money, it's not about, the book doesn't tell you how to spend because everybody is different. And so I don't know you and I'm different than you and we have different aspirations and whatnot. So I can't say this is what you should spend your money on. Nobody can do that for you. But it looks at the psychology of spending. So envy, keeping up with the Joneses, social aspiration, how to deal with money and your kids, your own background and experiences in life and how those shape your desire to show off your money and whatnot. Those are the topics that it tackles.
How did having kids change the way you think about money?
Well, I think every parent will relate to this. This is not a unique experience, but the moment my first child was born, my son, it was like a switch flips and you're like, I don't matter anymore. That kid matters and I'm just here to take care of it. And so you go from a very selfish perspective of before kids, it was, I want to make money so that I, Morgan, can live a better life, so that I, Morgan, can have a better car and better clothes.
And you had peak living when you got to sleep late in that cheap apartment.
Right. And then as soon as a kid's born, you're like, oh, I could care less about myself. It's all about that. That's a wonderful thing. I think having people in your life that you are really committed to taking care of, whether it's a child or somebody else you're taking care of, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And it happens in 1 second as soon as your kid's born. Like, I don't matter anymore. It's all about you. And then as the kids grow up a little bit, you start thinking about like, am I spoiling you? Where's the balance between tough love and spoiled? Like those lines can actually be very close to each other in how to deal with that. My son is now 9. He's not old, but he's not young anymore. He understands what's going on. He understands how much things cost. He's put it all together. And you can already see him trying to connect the dots of our own household money and our own household budgets and what we prioritize. So a lot of people ask me, how do you teach your kids about money? My answer is always, you don't need to, because they're paying attention whether you know it or not. You already are teaching them about money, even if you don't sit them down. Every time you say, we can't afford this, every time you say, I can't believe the neighbors bought that car, whatever it is, they're making a mental model of how this works. And by the time every kid is 18, for better or worse, they have a view of money, whether you sat them down or not. So I think the only way to really do it then is just lead by example. And like, rather than trying to sit them down and saying, let me tell you about compound interest. So here's how this works. For most kids, it's going to go in one ear, out the next. They're going to rebel. They don't want to do it. But be careful with your little sly comments and your household budget and whatnot, because they are absolutely paying attention to it.
All right, this is not rapid fire, but let's just say this is quick-ish. What is the last thing that you splurged on for yourself? Not for your wife, not for your kids, not for any of your,
Well, cheap because it was for everybody, but we bought a new house last month. It was more or less spur of the moment. It wasn't really planned, but it's great. We're all happy now. I always say like money is a tool to live a better life. And I think that was like the epitome of doing it. We can do this and we're all going to be happier.
What is a purchase that you have made at any point in your life that you regret and you still think about it?
This is the hardest one that you ask. I don't know. Do you have one?
Oh yeah.
Do you have one that instantly comes to mind?
Yeah, I have a few. I mean, but they were not large sums of money.
Yeah.
They were, it's like, oh, I bought this person a gift and we had a falling out, and it's like, and again, it's not a lot.
Yeah.
It's not oh my gosh, I bought that car and it turned out to be a lemon.
Well, here's one that does come to mind when you say that. And this is actually more of like a life lesson than a financial lesson. You buy somebody a gift, it's an expensive gift, and you don't get the reaction that you thought you would. And then you're like, this didn't go as I thought. But then you take a step back and you're like, wait a minute, did I buy that person a gift because it would make them happier, or because I thought it was going to bring me a lot of attention and admiration of being a hero for giving this gift? So, and your first reaction is like, oh, that's not good. And then you're like, wait a minute, this is not a good look on me either.
What is a charitable cause that you like to support financially?
I like what I call micro charity, which is rather than giving to an organization, some of which we do and respect them, they're great. I like finding the single mother who's really struggling and doing it at a micro level. I think you can see the results much clearer. And when you can see the results, I think you're more apt to do it in the future.
Do you have a favorite book, a fictional book, movie, television show that deals with money?
The movie Boiler Room had a big impact on me because I was so young when I saw it. And for those who don't know, it's a movie starring Ben Affleck, and it's about a fraud, basically. It's about this stock brokerage that is basically scamming people. But I think it very accurately depicts the stock market culture in the 1990s and early 2000s. It had a huge influence on me. Michael Lewis talked about his first book, Liar's Poker, was meant to show the nasty side of Wall Street. But the kids who read it at the time used it as an owner's manual to be like, oh, that's what I should go do. And he was like, no, stop. That was Boiler Room for me. It is meant to show a side of Wall Street that is disgusting and illegal. And I watched it and I was like, that's for me. Let's do it.
This happened with the movie Wall Street too.
Yes.
Oliver Stone has talked about how he thought, oh, this is going to show greed in a bad light. What Boiler Room was for you, that's what Wall Street was for me and my college roommates.
Yeah.
And that movie came out, and a year later, I knew guys who had the "Greed is Good" speech on a poster in their dorm.
I think it is so common for particularly young men to just look at it and be like, well, it's money and power and prestige. So who cares if it's illegal, and who cares if it's robbing widows and orphans? That's what I'm going for.
What is something that you wish you knew earlier in your life about money?
I wish I could tell myself to not be so anxious. We talked a lot about the anxiety, and that would be one, if you had a time machine, you could talk to yourself when you're 20 years old and say, don't worry about it. That doesn't mean everything's going to be okay. There's going to be challenges, hard things didn't go exactly as you thought they would, but things are going to be okay. I try to take that to heart right now because I imagine my 60-year-old self would be telling my 40-year-old self that today too. So I try to think about that quite a bit. You can apply that to many areas of life, but definitely for money too.
All right, I want to close with a penny for your thoughts. It can be about money, but it doesn't have to be. It can just be some bit of life wisdom that you picked up somewhere along the way that you can share with people who are listening.
I think the biggest thing about money is understanding that there is no right answer for everybody. And a lot of financial problems come when you take a good financial plan that is not right for you. And it causes a lot of damage because you're like, oh, this financial plan makes sense. And a smart person told me to do it, but it's not right for your personality, so it's going to drive you crazy. So you really have to spend a lot of time being introspective about you and your family and saying, like, this is really what we want and what makes us happy. And these are our goals. And that's what we're going to pursue, even if all these other friends and family and media tell us we should be doing something different. And it's the most important thing about money.
Did you and Gretchen have a talk about money early in your relationship? Because it's so important for any type of long-term relationship.
I always make this point that we have never had a financial argument, disagreement. We've argued and disagreed about other things, not money. Never been the case. I think we got lucky. That is the right word. That from a very early age, we started dating when she was 19. I think we merged our finances before we got married. It was a very clear, just like, hey, we're on the same page here. And it was never much of an issue. We've changed a lot and grown and adapted a lot. We spend differently. We have different, even just like the high level philosophical lifestyle, like who do we want to be, has changed considerably over time. But we've done it together. But I think that's a lot luck of just similar personalities with these things. So I guess to answer your question, there really was no conversation. It just kind of happened.
Man, you did get lucky.
I know.
There you go. Hope you enjoyed that conversation, and I hope you keep listening because there's a lot more to come in the next few months with guests like Dan Pink and Becky Quick. So hit that follow button so you don't miss a single episode. Check out the Morgan Housel podcast, pick up a copy of The Psychology of Money, and get ready for Morgan's new book coming this fall. I'm Chris Hill. Thanks for listening. See you next week.